Welcome to This Week in Habsland. I am Jordan, and I will be joined soon by my co-host Brian, and we are here to discuss all things Montreal Canadiens every Monday. You can find us on social media at Blue Sky and TikTok at HabslandPod. Now, Brian and I recorded the vast majority of the podcast prior to the Boston Bruin game on Sunday evening. I thought it was important to circle back and just add a little bit to the top of the episode regarding what happened in the Bruins game. It's nothing substantial, but I just wanted to make sure that the podcast was as up to date as possible. You'll hear us talk later on in the podcast about a variety of things, most of which aren't changed. There's some stuff about Emil Heineman that I think is very accurate. Even the 5-on-5 play, despite the 6-3 loss, I thought the 5-on-5 play versus the Bruins was fairly indicative of the positive trend that the team has been going on. Now, what I did want to add was two different points. One, because I think we've hit a bit of a fever pitch on the Cayden Primeau situation. And the other is because I wanted to see one more game of what Martin St. Louis was going to do with Lane Hutson and Mike Matheson. So on the Cayden Primeau front, I think at this point we can probably say it's not going to work out for him in Montreal. He has had quite a poor season so far. Save percentage hovering around .845. Now, for most of you that listen to Brian and I over the past couple years, we have been somewhat hesitant on Cayden Primeau in our first season in 2023. Last year, he did win us over. He had, I think, a fairly decent season, played 23 games, had a .910 save percentage, and it appeared that he had figured out enough to at least be a serviceable backup goaltender in the NHL. What we've seen so far this year is a regression to the guy that we saw, at least at the NHL level, in previous seasons. And I think a lot of people are now clamoring for the Canadiens to cut ties with him. What I just want to stress is I don't really see the need to rush this. From an optics standpoint, depending on who you're talking to, I think you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you do decide to move on from Cayden Primeau, like the argument will be, well, he's now costing the team games and we're not able to properly evaluate how good the team is. Now, if you recall, this is an argument that has been made in each of the past two seasons, but for the Canadiens goaltending being too good. We've talked a lot about how Jake Allen and Samuel Montembeault have stolen games over the past couple seasons, and that was almost clouding how good or how bad the Montreal Canadiens as a team were. Now people are actually saying the opposite, that Cayden Primeau is being so poor that we're not able to evaluate it. So I think, again, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. The options in Laval are Connor Hughes or Jakob Dobeš to call up. I think Hughes would make more sense considering the fact that you don't want to rush Dobeš up, and it would actually kind of mirror very closely what Cayden Primeau went through after going through 2 years in college and then making a debut, not as quick as Primeau did, but I think it'd probably be a better idea to have Hughes get the call up. But again, I'm going to stress maybe just a little bit of patience on this one, just a little bit more. It's the same discussion we've had with Justin Barron. It's the same discussion we've had with, even last year with Jesse Ullinen or Matthias Norlinder. It's okay to have patience and give these guys games. Look, Jesse Ullinen, in that case, he got well over 100 games with the team, roughly in the same order of magnitude, at least in terms of the number of years that they gave Matthias Norlinder a long look. I think they're doing that now with Cayden Primeau. Ultimately, I think we know that Samuel Montembeault is a solid NHL 1B at this stage of his career, and that there are multiple goaltending prospects on the way up. Monty's going to have to hold the fort for a few years, but those other guys like Dobeš, like Fowler, are going to be ready soon, but not quite just yet. It's not going to come from Cayden Primeau, but I don't totally see the need to cut bait just yet, but I, again, totally at this point understand the fan base's frustration with it and potentially the Montreal front office and the coaching staff kind of looking around and saying, I think that might be it. So that's one thing. We're clearly at a peak right now with this continual poor performances, and you have to feel for him a bit because over the last couple weeks he's played a lot less, and this week he did get 2 opportunities to play, and unfortunately neither of them really went in his favor. Maybe a few more games might do the trick, but I think at this point it's starting to look worse and worse. The other thing I wanted to touch on quickly before I jumped into the rest of the episode with Brian is the return of Mike Matheson on Power Play 1. I didn't talk to Brian about this because I wanted to see one more game if Martin St. Louis was going to keep Lane Hutson on the first wave of the power play. So recall this week, Mike Matheson missed the game to injury. Hudson got promoted to power play 1. Totally makes sense. When Matheson returned on Saturday afternoon against the Rangers, Hudson was still on power play 1. So I was curious to see, hey, is St. Louis going to keep it? And this was the opening he was waiting for. The opening of, okay, this is a real legitimate way to say, okay, you know what, Mike, we're going to park you on power play 2. We think we need you there. Lane has to go on power play 1. We think it works better. They got a couple, unfortunately, like the couple games that they got together weren't the greatest, but there's clearly something there. But St. Louis actually reverted back to Matheson on power play 1, and Matheson too had a pretty brutal game. After Primeau, Matheson probably had one of his worst games of the season for sure. And so I put some numbers together through some, digging into some of the advanced data on how Mike Matheson and Lane Hudson have fared so far on the power play. So I'm looking at the Corsi 4, so that is the shot attempts per 2 minutes on the power play. It's a bit of a convoluted stat, but it's essentially trying to show, and all these stats are per 2 minutes. So, right, so there's a 2-minute power play. I'm trying to get into the, trying to understand how does the power play operate when Lane Hudson is the quarterback and when Mike Matheson is a quarterback. They are almost never on the ice together at the same time. It might be actually, they might have never shared the ice. Maybe there's a brief moment on a 6-on-5 or a 6-on-4, but for the most part, they are not on the ice at the same time on the power play. So in terms of shot attempts per 2 minutes, so per power play, shot attempts for Lane Hudson, it's 3.21. For Mike Matheson, it's 2.62. Now you have to recall that the majority of this sample is Mike Matheson on power play 1 and Lane Hudson on power play 2. We're talking 90% of the minutes. So in terms of per 2 minutes, 3.21 for Hudson, 2.62 for Matheson. So Hudson clearly, the Hudson minutes are clearly more effective in terms of at least getting the pucks towards the net. Expected goals for per 2 minutes, 0.27 for Lane Hudson, 0.18 for Mike Matheson. So again, that is a 50% better output per 2 minutes on the power play when Lane Hudson is on the ice. And finally, high danger shot attempts, 0.89 for Lane Hudson, 0.41 for Mike Matheson. So well over double there in terms of getting high danger scoring opportunities. I think it's pretty clear at this point that the power play operates better when Lane Hudson is on the ice compared to Mike Matheson, and that's fine for Matheson. I think he'd be able to handle a diminished role, and quite frankly, I think there are a lot of strong arguments at this point to make that Matheson should probably get a reduced role in some capacity. Like, he is still on the first wave of the penalty kill. I think maybe reducing a minute or two at 5-on-5 and then reducing a minute or two on the power play might get us to a more comfortable number with Matheson, around maybe 20 minutes, where he might be better off. It's a very tricky thing. I understand how difficult this can be, especially with an alternate captain and a rookie. And some people may refuse to understand the complexity of that situation, but rest assured, it is a difficult thing to make. And I'm sure St. Louis is grappling with that, but I'm sure he will get to the point where he has no choice but to put Hudson on the first wave. I really thought this past week was that opportunity. A little disappointed it wasn't. So with that, I'll jump into the rest of the episode with Brian, where we talk about a whole host of other things like Kirby Dach, like Yuri Slafkovsky, and a ton more. Jayden Struble, Justin Barron, all the lot. So have fun. Take care. Brian, lots to get into this week, so let's maybe jump right into our headlines. I know we have a few ready to go. We'll kick off with one of mine, and this headline reads, "This is more like it," meaning, and I should mention that this part of the podcast is being recorded before the Bruins game, so obviously subject to change, but I think the week that the Canadiens just had is much more in line with what we were probably expecting coming into the season. So for instance, they lost the game they probably should have won in the Rangers game on Saturday afternoon.
Right.
They won the game against the bad team, but it was still a bit of a challenge in the Columbus game. The one that the Utah game, they were unable to win ugly. They were unable to win a game that they were not the better team, but they were at home. It wasn't Utah aren't exactly powerhouses. A better team would find a way to win and win ugly. The Canadiens were just not able to do that. So these three games, for me, kind of encapsulates like, okay, this is kind of more like return to regularly scheduled programming of playing, like they're going to be inconsistent. This is what an 80-point team looks like to people. I know there's going to be frustrations that fluctuate game to game, but there's going to be games where, like against the Rangers, where in the second and third period, their shot attempts were 43 to 32. They played better than the Rangers, who, yes, are struggling, but they're still the New York Rangers at home. And the Canadiens were extremely physical in that game. It did cost them, and I know you want to get to elements of why it cost them later. But they played great in that game, but they still lost. And I'm like, that's what rebuilds are, right?
Yeah, that's about right. You can't expect to beat even a struggling New York Rangers team if you're not on your game and if you're not getting all of the bounces. Yeah. I think that's sort of par for the course in terms of that New York game in New York, which is a factor as well. The Utah game, I was in the building for that. That was a close one that really didn't feel like the Habs were controlling it as much as I would have liked. A game at home against another bad team, you would hope that the Montreal Canadiens had controlled the play a lot more, had controlled the pace of play especially a lot more, because it seemed like Utah, albeit a slow pace, they were determining the pace. So, and the Habs were happy to sort of just sit back and be like, okay, you want to set the pace this slow? We'll just react to it. And that obviously was not going to be enough. Columbus, vastly different, one night to the next. And the Habs have a history of being very bad in back-to-backs. The second game of a back-to-back has been, I won't say the Achilles heel because, you only have two legs and the Habs have a bunch of Achilles heels then. But that certainly has been an issue with this team, not being able to, either because they gave everything the night before and they're just tired, or they got outplayed the night before and they can't get out of their own heads. I don't know what the reality of the situation has been in their minds, but certainly they haven't been strong in the second of a back-to-back, and this was the exception. They didn't play that great against Utah, and then they went to Columbus and played a much better game, winning that one. So, albeit in overtime. And the closeness of these games has been refreshing too. You go 1-1-1. You get 3 points in these last 3 games. Again, like Jordan said, we're not counting the Boston one yet, just because we're recording early. But you go 1-1-1. And all 3 are close games. And that's exactly what we wanted from this team. That's what we expected from this team. So I'm thrilled with your headline. I think it's spot on. This is exactly what we were expecting from the back half of last season. And obviously, if a few other things go our way, which we're going to get into shortly, a couple of these games could have been vastly different.
Right. So we're parking the ref stuff is what we're insinuating over and over again. If we can drill in a bit on the Utah game, which I think people were rightfully disappointed in that game. It was very winnable. It was at home. You had a few days off. So parking the part where the Habs take a ton of penalties in the first period, we'll see why in a moment. But is it too simple, Brian, to just say they took, I think it was like 3 straight penalties, and that just took them out of the game? I'm not trying to say that's an excuse because it shouldn't be, but is it as easy as that? Like beforehand, they were okay to start the game. All the penalties disrupted the rhythm. Guys like Slavkovsky and Doc just don't get on the ice for penalty kill. And then they just never find their rhythm again, finish the game, which is an overtime with only 12 shots.
Right. Well, my counter to that is Gallagher doesn't kill penalties, and he was able to get himself back in the game.
Right.
Anderson does kill penalties, but if I remember correct, his accounted for one. He had one penalty in that? No, I'm thinking of a different game. Anyway. A lot of players who don't kill penalties were able to get themselves back into the game. So I don't think that should be an excuse. You know what I mean? Like this team has been disjointed and sloppy basically all season. So to say that the refereeing pulling them out of their element, I don't think it's that. It's a factor, certainly. Is it easier to win a game in which the refs are fair and you get a sort of equal amount of penalties, or if you're actually the cleaner team but you're getting more penalties? Like that's definitely a factor, right? Like we can't deny that that's the case, but you still have to prepare yourself to play a full 60-minute hockey game regardless of what the refs are going to do. The Habs have beaten the other team and the refs before. Right. That's what I'm saying here, right? Like and other teams do it. Other teams do it consistently. You're not always going to have the refs on your side. Sometimes they're against you. So sometimes you have to beat both, and they weren't able to do that against Utah. And the lack of chance generation in that game, the lowest amount of shots on net since 2009, Jordan.
Dominik Hasek.
15 years.
Yep. I remember the game.
Dominik Hasek, right. Yep. So in a game when you only generate that amount, how can you expect any better?
Exactly, yeah. And for those who are missing my reference, I think we've brought it up on the podcast before, where Dominik Hasek, I'm fairly certain it's that game. If it's around that time and it was 12 shots, he said, like, I think it was against the Red Wings. They won 3-0. He said that was the easiest shutout of my life. And yeah, sure, no problem. You brought up Josh Anderson there. So I do want to maybe shift briefly to the Rangers game. Again, refereeing aside, I absolutely loved that the Canadians are making it a point now with Jacob Trouba, where so this is harkening back to the hit on Barron in their first meeting. And that Matheson, like, don't forget, Matheson did challenge him immediately. Matheson's not the right guy, but he was there. He stood up for his teammate.
Yep.
This was a more appropriate tilt, and I love what Josh Anderson did. I think he beat the brakes off of Trouba, to be honest.
Yeah, both rounds.
Yeah.
They went at it. Anderson landed 4 or so punches. Trouba maybe landed one okay one, and then they separated. And I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't much of a that was like half a tilt.
Right.
And then they go right back at it, round 2, and Anderson beats the pulp off him again. So, yeah, great. Nothing but extremely high praise for Josh Anderson. Another element of his game that is really, really crucial to this team right now is defending his teammates, even when it's many weeks after the fact.
Yes.
These guys remember, and it's I was absolutely thrilled with this.
Yeah, and I hope they fight him again in the next game. Honestly, I don't think he'll ever accept a Jack Eye fight, but he'll accept a Struble fight, I'm sure. They can get, I think they should, the Habs should make it a real point at this, right now. Like, they're not going to be thrown around the way they have been in the first 15 or so games. I think you've definitely seen David Savard, especially this week, not just in the Rangers game, because like he did a lot of stuff in the Rangers game, but other games too, where he was incredibly physical and low-key dirty, but like not dirty in a way of like, I want to like get someone injured, dirty and like, I'm going to do something to you that the refs won't see, but that's a pain in the ass to you.
Right.
But yeah, Saturday afternoon, there's that huge skirmish where Jonathan Quick, I'm 50-50 on whether or not that was all right, because Doc was very much in his kitchen. But then the melee that ensues, Slav was in there, Savard was in there. I like watching that specific scrum, I was like, oh, that's what the Rocket have been doing all season.
Right.
Now, we'll get to why that might not work in the NHL in your headline. But yeah, that was just one moment that I just really loved. I'm like, okay, they're quite literally punching back at this point against other teams in these moments where they don't want to get pushed around anymore. And Josh Anderson was a huge part in that on Saturday afternoon. Can I just mention one other thing about like my headline just to close it up?
Yeah, please do.
This is more like it. This is the team I thought we were going to see. Since that Pittsburgh game, which for me, I know other people are picking other games, but for me is the game where they kind of figured out their defensive identity. That's November 2. They are 19th in the NHL in shot attempt percentage since then, and they have a positive expected goal differential since then.
Oh my goodness.
So, like, look, the record is not too much different. I believe it's 4-7-1 before that game and 4-5-2 since that game. So, like, tiny differences. But the underlying numbers have kind of flipped. We've done the shot attempt percentage, expected goals being like 31st in the league. Last week we said they were both in like 27. They've both crept up another 1 or 2 spots this week. This is more like it. This is the team I thought we were going to see. They clearly needed that dozen or so games at the beginning of the season to get their act together. And some guys just weren't ready for the regular season. Jack-Eye, you could argue Slav and Doc. Like Suzuki, we've talked about it, but like he's just a slow starter. Once we got to November, they've returned to the team we thought they would beat. It doesn't exclude what happened in October and is the reason they're still at the bottom of the East, but there have been positive trends.
Bottom of the East and basically bottom of the league, third from the bottom in points percentage here. But I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And maybe it took those 12 crappy games to sort of show them this is where you don't want to be.
Right.
This is the wrong. Should they need that? They're professional athletes. I don't think they needed the 12 games so much as it was something of a wake-up call. But results-wise, you said that it hasn't reflected entirely in the results yet. You're right. But the last 8 games, 4-3-1. That's an improvement. You can't question that at all. That's an improvement. 9 points in 8 games. That's on pace for that like 85-ish points thing that we were talking about at the beginning of the season. That's even more on pace for like 90 points. Still not playoffs. But this is more what we were expecting from this team.
Yeah. And then, so just last thing on that, if we're looking at the break and how they've started to play, one thing you might want to consider is how much Cayden Primeau has played since November 2nd. Like, there are statement games, like you're like to your point about like do they need the wake-up call? There was at least 3 games that were mega wake-up calls. The Kraken game, the first Rangers game, and the Washington game, which is the one that I think that broke St. Louis and the coaching staff. But also, it's like, well, how much has Cayden Primeau really played since then? I've not looked at it. I'm just wondering it because we know we've gotten a lot more Montembeault in November, really.
Yeah.
So that again, I'm just talking like shot attempt percentage, expected goals. That is independent of goaltending, and goaltending overall has still not been great. But maybe a bit of the vibe switch too is just Monty definitely getting into a better rhythm.
Yeah, Monty in a better rhythm, playing better, and Primeau playing less. As much as we hate to say it, Primeau playing less does help the results.
Yeah.
He's had a tough run.
So we don't usually make big deals about NHL refereeing on this podcast because we just agree that it's bad more times than not.
Yeah.
But I think we're making a bit of an exception this week. Brian, please get into your headline.
When it goes from bad to egregious, that's when we step in.
Yep.
That's when Habsland steps in. Not even. It's not like making a point so much as it's just been absolutely getting my goat. So my headline is referees, more like refs are cheese.
No.
And that's just a little bit of awful levity before I get into the most depressing aspect of this week for me personally. Like going to that Utah game and being in the building, one of the best parts of being there, other than just being with my pals and enjoying a game together, even though we're losing, one of the best parts was being able to yell "refs, you suck" with the rest of the Bell Center, which I don't usually do. I don't think you should partake in that in normal circumstances, because I think in normal circumstances the fans in the building are so biased that the "refs, you suck" chants often come after a nothing play. Somebody trips on their own skates, it looks like the stick was in there, and the whole crowd erupts really upset. There's a difference between that and what we saw in that Utah game, what we saw continuing into the Columbus game a little bit, and then really awfully in the New York game. Jordan, do you know what the score was in the New York Rangers game if you don't count power play goals?
Is it 3-1?
It was 3-1. All three, sorry, not all three, 3 of 4 of the Rangers goals, the
Okay.
Trocheck goal late in the first period was the only one that was not a power play goal, which also awful to give up a goal that late in the game. 1956, like just way to shoot yourselves in the foot. But the other 3, like that would have been the 1-1 goal. That would have been the 1-1 goal after the Habs went up in the lead. And then in the third, Caulfield's goal and Nick Suzuki's goal would have tied the bow on that. So again, you have to be able to beat the other team and the refs. That is just part of the NHL, which I hate how that sounds coming out of my mouth. Like you should just be able to beat the other team and that's it. And the refereeing should be good. But it's not. It just flat out is not. When after a play where your player gets pushed into the opposition's goalie, then gets blockered in the face, and then there a scrum ensues that is completely two-sided. There's like every single battle is 1-on-1 or 2-on-2, or everybody's roughing, everybody's throwing fists. How we end up with a penalty, I don't really comprehend that. And so yes, it takes you out of the game like you said before, but more importantly against the team like the Rangers, who literally are just power play and goaltending merchants. That's all they do well now. They are middle of the pack or worse in every single category. When you talk advanced stats, anything, the Rangers, the 2 things they do really well, they're good on the power play and their goaltending is absolutely kick ass.
Yep.
And so, of course, if the referees are helping them, they're going to win that game. So I'm sick of talking about this already. I know it was my idea to do this headline and I wanted to get into it, but it's just so frustrating to be winning a game through the eye test and to not get the results because you're not getting power plays when you should, and you're having to kill penalties when you shouldn't.
So this is where I struggle, and I'm going to get a little meta here. This is where I struggle a bit with what the NHL wants from an entertainment standpoint. Because part of what certainly draws people in, beyond the skill, like that's a given, is people love seeing the physicality. People love seeing the little skirmishes, the little like, oh, don't go near my goaltender. I'll, little cross check, little this, little that. However, and like, again, if you watch Rocket games, it's almost exclusively this at this point. And it's a delight to watch because it's cool. There's a lot of like camaraderie, team togetherness, boys banding together, all that stuff.
Yeah.
In the NHL, more often than not, anytime there's a bigger skirmish like that, the referees will take 1 extra guy. Or maybe more accurately in this sense, they'll take 1 less guy. to make sure one team gets a power play. I don't know if that's coming down from the NHL because they want to get rid of the physical, the toughness. I don't know how to like properly explain this element of the game, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. Or do they want to say like, we want to have that and also have power plays because that power plays equals goals and that highlights the skills. Is that what they're being told from the NHL? Because honestly, I was watching the game a little on tape delay. So it was like 6 minutes between the puck, the whistle and the play starting up again. The skirmish is like 90 seconds of it. How it took them 4.5, 5 minutes to figure out, okay, we got to make sure we get Slavkovsky. We got to get Savard for sure. Okay, let's go get the other guys on the Rangers. And it just like, it was minutes on minutes on minutes for them to decide, okay, well, we probably want to give the Rangers a power play here. And it's not just like to favor the Rangers. It's not an anti-Canadian thing. I think that's what the discussion was. And it annoys me that like the NHL is all about like playoff hockey and toughness and physicality, but also we're going to be very particular and weird with like these like skirmishes and like, oh, we're going to take one guy. Or again, like I've said, like maybe take one less guy in this situation. It's something that annoys me a lot with how the NHL is refereed. And this isn't like the Anderson call against in the Rangers game, actually, where there's a boarding, I forget who the player was. A Rangers player was I think it was on Heineman. Boards, cross checks, whatever you want to call it. And 30 seconds later, Anderson does something similar, not as bad, but Anderson got called. The Rangers player didn't get called. That's a different discussion. That's just like poor refereeing. The stuff that frustrates me is this like these skirmishes where like the NHL clearly wants this in their game, but that they're de-incentivizing it because there's always going to be a power play. But you want teams to be physical because it's part of the game. We've seen. Anyways, I know I'm not making too much sense here, but I think you understand where I'm getting at. Like it's certainly it's frustrating because this is a part of the game. And there's a way to referee it responsibly, and I don't think they're doing that. And it's very consistent with how they do it. So it's obviously intentional.
If that's the case, it's despicable. It really, really is, Jordan. Like not to bring us to a very serious place here, but if it's coming down from the top and the referees are being told that either A, they're trying to remove that from the game by being biased, you can't call it anything other than bias, whether it's one way or the other. There's a bias there if you're not taking everybody or if you're taking one less guy, one more guy, whatever it is in order to get a power play. So if it's coming down from the top, you're affecting the results of hockey games that, they talk about parity. If that's coming down from the top, they don't give a crap about parity. Like that much is obvious. And then you said it's not just against the Canadians. It's true when you look at other teams, other games. Like Canadian teams get it worse than American teams, I think, in general, because we have the Habs and Toronto, and maybe it's just because Toronto is very vocal about it the same way we are. But I've watched some Toronto games where they get the raw end of the deal. It happens once in a while as well. But certainly if that's coming down from the top, man, that's awful. In the past, I've tried to throw the referees a bone. I've tried to give them an out of like, the game is incredibly fast. And if two referees have a hard time seeing 12 guys on, 12 on ice players, 10 of them skaters, and see everything that's going on, fair enough. You miss a call. It happens. Like on that side, it's fine. But on the side of a skirmish like that, or when something's going on with the puck carrier, like that Anderson thing, both referees were looking right at it. Both referees were definitely looking at the boarding call that had happened 30 seconds prior. To call the second one and not the first one is just abysmal refereeing. I do love what Martin St. Louis said about 6 times in the press conferences after. I thought we had a good game, but I'm not going to mention the referees.
That's the truth. That's literally a great one-sentence summary of the game.
It is absolutely perfect because, well, the reporter didn't ask about the referees, so he's being ironic and he's saying essentially, he's drawing your attention towards the referees without saying that they were bad, and he did it about 5 or 6 times. So I'm extremely happy that he's speaking up because it's getting ridiculous now. It seriously is getting ridiculous. I'm tired of the Canadians getting the raw end of the deal in terms of refereeing. Unless you have something else on it, Jordan, I'm sick of talking about this.
Yeah, let's move on. Last headline. It's mine, and it reads, Kirby Dach's Odyssey is long and winding. So more downs than ups these days for Kirby Dach. I do think there are moments where he's starting to play better. Like he's starting to drive to the net again. He's starting to be able to dangle and keep possession as he goes to the net again. But he's also having some like brutal passes on power play 1. We know about the penalties against the Rangers that ultimately did cost them the game. It's up and down. And look, we saw Slavkovsky this week bounce back. A side note on Slav, like, just shoot more, please. Like, averaging barely more than 1 shot a game. And the second half of last year, Slav was shooting like well over 2 shots per game. Shoot more, you're very good at it, I promise. As for Kirby Dach, like, so now he's on a line with Josh Anderson and Joshua Roy. Like, okay, like very much straight line guys. And, well, I mean, that's in terms of Anderson. Roy's a little bit slower, but there's still some cerebralness to his game. I think it's just going to, for the whole season at this point, it's going to be an up and down road. It's an odyssey back to the guy that he was and to become better than the guy that he was at the end of the 23 season. I know there are a lot of people that are frustrated, that are ready to make declarations on, well, they need to get a second line center. They need to like go make a trade for one. I think we just need to be patient on this. What is the rush? The same question I asked for Cayden Primeau, the same question I will ask here and there about Justin Barron or Jaden Struble. I ask about Kirby Dach. What is our actual rush here? We are not making the playoffs. We are not competing for the Stanley Cup. Let's take our time. It's going to be an odyssey. There are starting to be more and more points of positivity here. Not literally in points, but just like there are moments, there are flashes of like, oh, wait, right, that's there. But it's taking a long time. It's an odyssey. It's hopefully not 10 years, but let's say it's this one season where he refines his game. Anything, Brian, on Kirby Dach and how he has meandered throughout the season so far?
It was nice to see the physicality come back this week.
Yeah.
That was an element that I think was lacking for Kirby Dach, and for it to come back in games that were close like this and for him to have a sort of meaningful effect on the game through that was a very positive thing, because that, regardless how well you're playing, how your brain is operating, whether your passes are hitting the tape or not, that is something that you can always control. Are you being physical? Are you going into the corners hard? Are you winning your battles? The results of winning those battles, that you can't control so much as you can really do your best to win them. And that's what Kirby Dach was doing. So I'm thrilled to see that coming back. I think that when Laine comes back, which seems very imminent at this point, we're going to have a much closer thing to a real top 6. And that's going to help Kirby Dach in terms of the offense much, much more. One thing that Kirby Dach has always sort of done has been decent to good defensively. He's been back checking well. He's been getting his stick in passing lanes as best he can. So that's all good. But what I really do want to see is when that top 6 sort of comes together, Kirby Dach get a little bit more offensive opportunities and create them himself, because that really is his game, the play driving. Right, Jordan? We've said that in the past. It's play driving, it's play making. And so with better players on his line, I think that he could definitely do that.
Yeah, I also don't totally agree with his current placement on the power play. I don't love him in what it used to be the Suzuki spot. I know him and Suzuki have now, well, actually Slav is now more at the bumper, Suzuki's at the net front, and Dach is now on the right half wall. I don't love it there, but I mean, anyways, that's a complete side point. Enough of headlines. Let's get into part 2 of the episode. We're going to bring back either or, really to just hit on a bunch of other players that we'll talk about here and there, but maybe just focus on them in a bit more detail. So this segment is, I have 5 different statements for Brian. I will ask him to pick one or the other that he thinks is more likely. So our first one up today, Brian, what is more likely, Juraj Slavkovsky or Emil Heineman scoring 20 goals this season? Heineman's at 5, Slav's at 2. What do you got?
So first of all, before I get into the answer, I can't tell if it's good for Heineman or bad for Slavkovsky that this one exists, that this either or exists. I think it's both. I think it's great for Emil Heineman in his rookie season that he's already at 5, and I think that it's a rough start of the season for Juraj Slavkovsky in 23 games, only getting those, well, technically 20 games because he missed 3, but the first quarter of the season only getting those 2 goals. So I can't tell which is, if it's better for Heineman, worse for Slav, but I will say this, it hinges on 2 things. On Slavkovsky's side, 14 of 20 of Juraj Slavkovsky's goals, he scored 20 last year, 14 of 20 were assisted by either Suzuki and or Caulfield. A lot of them, both of those guys, and then probably 4 out of the other 6 were Matheson. So he'll still get the ones from Matheson, but he's not getting many from Cole and Nick right now because he's not the one finishing on the power play. A, because he hasn't been able to, and B, because he's not sort of in a position to do so. They're not making the plays where he is the finishing element to the power play, the attack. And B, he's not on their line.
Yeah.
So he's not going to get assists in that way. So the chemistry that they have, I think, is super crucial to Slavkovsky hitting 20 goals. I wish that wasn't the case. I think a first overall pick at 20 years old should be generating on his own. But he is still 20 years old at the same time. So you got to give it a bit of time. So having help from those guys, I think would be great. And then on the other side of things, Heineman, we're not going to get into this too much because as you told me before we started recording, it's unclear whether this is for the long term now or if it was just to get Matheson sort of back into the game slowly. But Hudson was on the first power play unit for the first time ever in a game where Matheson was also playing. That was against the Rangers. So if that is to continue, I think that hurts Heineman. I think that helps Slavkovsky. So that's the thing too. Ultimately, to answer this question, I think it is Slavkovsky. Now, to be clear, I think they both have a pretty good chance to do it. Heineman's actually
you can't do that on this segment, Brian. You have to be binary.
I know. No, I made my pick. Okay. I made my
All
pick.
right.
It's Slav. But I do want to say
no fence sitting.
No. I my ass is firmly off of the fence. It is on.
Okay, that's disgusting.
It is on. It is on the green grass on one side of the fence. Heineman has a great chance to do it. I think Slav has a great chance to do it. I hope they both do it.
Sure.
But I am picking Slav.
Okay, thank you for the explicit pick there. So jumping in on the Slavkovsky part where, he scored 20 last year. I do remember saying at the beginning of the year, people will be disappointed if he gets like 55 points or 60 points. Like it's only a 5 or 10 point increase. I still think we're heading there where he could absolutely finish a season with, 17 goals and 34 assists. And people will say, wow, like real, like big, not sophomore slump, but he regressed a bit. And it's like, well, not necessarily. Like it's still D+3 20-year-old season getting 50 points. It's still not nothing. So I think expectations for Slavkovsky are pretty up there. In terms of Heineman, so I'll take the other side. I'll say Heineman's more likely. Last week's episode, we said he needs to get a bit more opportunity here. And, there was really no fluctuation recently in his ice time. It's all hovering around 10 minutes a game. Well, we finally saw a bit of increase in the Utah and Columbus games. He was closer to 14 minutes a game. And he scored in Columbus what we thought and had hoped was the game-winning goal. Unfortunately, there's a really poor bounce off of a Cayden Primeau skate that tied that game up, but we got a Suzuki winner. It's okay. He is scoring really talented goals. He is playing a very physical game, which means he's eventually going to score the goals 2 feet in front of the net because he's in the right spots. When you add that type of goal scoring to his game, and again, it's part of its opportunity, then you have a 20-goal score very easily. Now, the point you made about Hudson being bumped to power play 1, we'll see. TBD. We don't know how long it's going to be for. That will certainly affect elements of Heineman's opportunities, right? You get more opportunities with Lane Hudson's on the ice. We're getting to Hudson soon, I promise. So, it's tough. I mean, also we have to put the small caveat too that Heineman just needs 15 more and Slavkovsky needs 18 more. That makes a bit of a challenge. So I can definitely see Heineman, like we're talking last 2 weeks of the season and Heineman's at like 17 and Slav's at 15. And it just takes one night. Where, Slav had it last year. He had the hat trick late in the season, and that got him actually close to 20, which he got on the last night. That definitely could happen. I'm going to lean Heineman being more likely because it seems like the opportunities are now starting to get there, and he just has a bit more of a head start, if you want to call it that, on Slav.
A head start and just flat out a better shot. Like that's the other just obvious element to this. Heineman has a snipe, and we've seen. So if you just talk about the best shot either one of them have taken, or the best 3, let's say. I think Slavkovsky wins because he's had 3 just bullet one-timers that went to the back bar, and you're like, oh my, I didn't even see the puck, and neither did the goalie. But if you look at the aggregate, the average of all the shots that they've taken, Heineman has a better NHL release. So you might be right. I think I'm banking with Slavkovsky just because I really want to see it. I love the guy, and I think like I said, they're both going to do it. So you know what? Maybe I will sit back up on the.
Okay,
offense.
Let's go. Okay, actually, can we do one sidebar? Actually, I just thought of this now, and we're doing this on zero research. Top 5 shots on the active roster right now. Include Line A in here. Include Patrick Line A.
Players like top 5 shoot, like in terms of quantity of shots.
In terms of
percentage.
In terms of how good are they at shooting the puck?
Well, it's Dvorak 1. It's Montembeault. No, okay. Cole Caulfield, the obvious number 1.
I think he has to be. Is Line A 2?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed.
He just slot him in automatically.
Okay.
He like historically he's better than Caulfield.
Yeah.
but injuries, not seeing him, never
Sure.
doing it in a Habs jersey. Let's give the edge to Caulfield. So that's 1, 2, 3.
See, 3 it opens.
3 it opens up. I think it might be Heineman. It's either Suzuki or it's Heineman in my mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you put up Suzuki in there because that's the most underrated shot on the team. We'll always think
just
of Suzuki
the smartest.
as like, it's just it's slick Nick. Like it's just he has the moves. He has a really good release. I'd put Suzuki a hair over Heineman, and I guess Slav would be 5 now. Bonus question: in September, when Ivan Demidov's not getting benched an entire game and playing on the Habs, where does he slot into the top 5? I don't think he passes Laine or Caulfield.
No, but he could be in that 3 spot right behind them.
Okay, anyways, just a little, I just thought of that.
Because he's got both elements. He's got a laser, not at the same level as Caulfield and Laine, but he's also got the smarts of when to release and what angle to release from, like Suzuki does.
Yeah.
So I think he's a nice sort of amalgam of those that would put him pretty comfortably, I'd say, in the 3 spot.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of 27 goal seasons and 68
Which
assists.
sidebar, Jordan, you make me so happy bringing up Demidov. Just that's all. Just because he's not here yet, he's not getting ice time. The situation sucks. But looking ahead, isn't it a nice feeling to know that he's right around the corner? We're like a year away from Demidov just absolutely blowing the wheels off of every NHL team and scoring a bunch of goals and being fantastic.
He's a year away, and from what we've seen when he's been given actual chances this year in the KHL, he's been incredible.
He's the real deal. Yeah.
The passing is still there at the KHL level, which he didn't really play last year. Everything's great on Ivan Demidov. We'll definitely do a Demidov segment sometime in the next few weeks, maybe next month or so.
Why don't we wait until Kent Hughes and the sort of management group releases a statement saying, you know what, we're not going to go to Russia after all to watch him, and then he'll start getting ice time again.
That's true.
Because did you notice it right around the time they said we're going to go visit Demidov in Russia and see how he's doing? That's when he starts getting benched again. Either that or when he rejected the 11th attempt at a contract that I'm giving him.
That's probably
every time he gets benched, I'm just adding one to the tally of contracts that have been offered to Ivan Demidov in the KHL.
May 31st, I think that's the date he is officially released from that KHL contract. Cannot come sooner. Okay, second either or. We got a little distracted. We'll tighten it up a little bit more now. Justin Barron, what is more likely, Brian? Justin Barron or Jayden Struble still being on the roster next season?
This one should be harder than it is. Right now, Struble is the better defenseman than Barron. I don't think that there's an argument that could be made the other way. He's better defensively. His positioning is smarter. He's better at stick checking. His physicality is certainly better. Those open ice hits are crushing, and he's better in battles. His transition game is really smart and effective. It's very simple breakouts that he does. He can carry the puck through the neutral zone. He can make a smart pass. And offensively, 2 goals, 3 assists compared to Barron's 1 goal. Those are the results, but I think that the eye test also reads Struble, and that's really not ideal for Barron because Barron's supposed to be the offensive guy. He's the guy who's getting power play 2 time when somebody else is in the box or something else is going on, right? Like he's the one that this week we saw on power play 2 for the time being. Now there's the left-hand, right-hand stuff, but this management group has shown repeatedly they don't give a crap about right-hand, left-hand. They don't care. Maybe they never will. At least for the time being they haven't, and it's possible they won't. But for now, at least, I think they want to keep the better player. Also, final point, just to sort of solidify, Struble's the one who replaced Gouli when he was out. Because Struble has a bit of that Gouli thing of being great everywhere, able to activate, good defensively, very, very smart. So I'm leaning Struble.
Okay, so I'm leaning Barron. And this is not just me being a contrarian.
Interesting.
I'm trying to read the tea leaves here because explain some of this stuff to me with Struble. Twice now, they have basically said, we're going to scratch you because Arbor Jack Eyes turned a corner. Honestly, I think the preseason messed him up so much that he needed, like the rest of the damn team, 10 games to get it going. Jack Eye has been a lot more consistent as the number 5 guy. But what's happened in the last few weeks, every time Struble's about to get scratched, David Savard misses a game, then Mike Matheson misses a game. And to really call it out, like Justin Barron had a rough outing on Wednesday against Columbus.
Yep.
And maybe you would have thought, like, well, they're going to scratch him now if Matheson's coming back. That's an easy call. But they still chose to scratch Struble instead, and that Barron got the ice time. And to me, like we talked about this earlier in the year, like there's clearly something we're not seeing with Barron that the coaching staff does see, because they are still investing time and energy in him. And to that point, I thought it was actually really like good on the Habs for saying like, we're not going to scratch you because of a dumb mistake you made. Learn from it. You're getting back out on the ice on Saturday.
Right.
So from that vantage point, and I don't think Struble's been as strong this season as he has been last year. Maybe that was last year was just like, rose tinted glasses. But yeah, there's clearly something in the coaching staff where they really want to give Barron opportunities. And maybe part of that is they're both, I believe now that they are both basically waiver eligible. Struble needed something like 15 to 20 games. So he's basically right at that number. So they're both would have to go through waivers if they were ever to be sent down again. So they're not. Maybe they were just told by management that like, give Barron 50, 60 games this year. Like, we need to see it. This is a huge decision it is a less important role, but a right-handed defenseman is something that matters more. So I'm actually leaning more Barron, and not because of the eye test. Barron's still making mistakes. He still has moments though where he makes a 90-foot pass, and you're like, damn, can we do that without the stupid turnovers or without becoming a pylon at a random moment? Like, or just a brief brain fart he had against Columbus where he just forgets his man for a third of a second, and that's the NHL.
The first goal, eh?
Yeah,
the first goal. To be fair, Struble was on the ice for that one as well, and they were both pylons. So let's spread the blame out a little bit.
Sure.
But yes, it was I guess primarily Barron's guy,
right?
But they both looked like sort of pylons out there. Look, all that's fair enough. I'll be honest with you, I can't figure out why Barron has a longer leash, it seems, than Struble. Yes. And despite the fact that Struble has played more games, he's played more games because he's been more consistent. Yeah. But he's only played 5 more games. It's 17 to 12. Whereas based on the play, it should have been more like 22, 23 to like whatever, 7, 8. It should be more a Monty Primo split.
Yeah, there is the small caveat of, well, they both kind of missed time to injury in some way. Right,
of course, and that's
Struble missed 4 or 5 games at the top. It's not totally clear at what point he was actually like cleared to play, and same goes for Barron. I think it was a bit more conservative on like concussion worries, but him too. It seemed like he was ready, and they were still like, we're gonna give you another game or two to ease up. So that's kind of been wiped out. So that's an interesting comparison of the number of games played.
And then there's also just the side. I brushed it off, but maybe I shouldn't have, of the left hand, right hand stuff, because how many left-handed top 6 defensemen do you actually need? And how many right ones do you need? Because at the moment, how many right ones do we actually have? We have Savard, and then it goes right to Barron. Yeah. And then we have a bunch of lefties playing on the right side. So, and just to sort of list them off, because it sort of makes a good segue into the next either or, number 3, because we're still talking Ds. You've got Matheson, Gooley, Hudson, and then sort of Struble, Jack-Eye, and then Engstrom waiting in the wings, and then a couple other guys waiting in the wings. On the right-hand side, you have the very sadly injured David Reinbacher, who we literally don't know what the future holds for him, because his progression was not ideal on a bad team last year, and then he gets hurt when he's ready to make a step. So that's sort of going to slow him down. And then Mailloux looks incredible offensively, but the defense still needs work. So it really is that right side thing that there's just too many question marks there. And maybe in passing, we could talk about the David Jiricek sweepstakes. I don't even know if you want to call it a sweepstakes, but Minnesota ends up landing David Jiricek. I know the Habs were in on it. I'm happy they were in on it, but I'm happy they didn't give away the farm either. Like, if they were going to beat Minnesota, they would have had to give a lot. So, fair enough. They got a better package from Minnesota. That's okay. I still believe in Mailloux. I still believe in Reinbacher. I think management does as well, and that's why they didn't jump on it. Yeah. He was my favorite defenseman from that draft class. So that's coming from somebody who loved Jiricek more than Nemitz, who still believes in him. But, we didn't sell the farm either to get him. So I like that.
Yeah, the Jiricek stuff is interesting. I would have assumed that it would have included at least the Calgary pick, and then plus the Habs second in 2026 or whatever, plus a little bit more probably.
Well, Minnesota gave the first, second, and fourth, plus a pretty steady defenseman. So we would have had to give a fairly steady defenseman with just a lower ceiling than Jiricek. Ideally, they would want a right-handed guy as well, because that's what everybody needs. So anyway, I don't know if we need to deliberate on it any more than that, because we didn't get him. But I'm just glad we didn't sell the farm. That's all.
Third, either or. Brian, what is more likely? Mike Matheson being traded this season or him finishing out his contract on the Montreal Canadiens at the end of the 2026 season?
So that contract ends at age 32 for Mike Matheson. He's at 4.875, ends in 2026, like you said. So the most likely scenario in my mind actually is one that doesn't exist in this hypothetical, and that's that he's traded during the offseason or next season. I think that's the most likely scenario if the Habs don't improve enough to be buyers rather than sellers at next deadline. So there's that. And then there's the question that I asked in the last segment that I said would be a good segue. How many left-handed, I said top 6 before, but how many left-handed top 4 defensemen are needed? Because that in reality is what we're tasking Matheson with being on this team. We've got Gooley and Hudson for the future. I love that on the left-hand side. No offense to Mike Matheson. I love him as a Canadian, but that's the left-hand side. And then if you're saying, well, he's going to be 32, so maybe he's becoming a top 6 defenseman rather than a top 4 one. I think a ton of teams would love to have him in their top 4 as an offensive left-handed guy. And B, I would rather keep that for a defensive player. If you already have Hudson on the left-hand side, who's very offensively driven, and you have Gooley who does both, you need to sort of balance it out with some defense, a guy who kills penalties really well. Not to say that Matheson hasn't. He's killed penalties well, but he's not a pure defensive player. He's always going to want to, remove the shackles and go up ice on a rush chance. So I just think it begs that question. How many top 4 defensemen are needed on the left-hand side? And then the other sort of the counter to that I could see being an argument is, could Matheson and Savard be the right side of the D for the 25-26 season in the top 4? It allows Gooley and Hudson to both play on the left. This plan would fail, though, if Mailloux and Reinbacher are both ready to take on the NHL.
Yeah.
Because even if they're only ready for to be the 4th and 6th defenseman, you can't have both Matheson and Savard in there. And I really don't like the idea of Mailloux and Reinbacher being given the Struble-Barron treatment of being scratched, a little less than half the time. So this is a really hard question, Jordan. This is really, really hard. I think the most likely scenario is that he is, of these two options, either traded this season or finishing out the contract. I think they're going to have him finish out the contract.
Oh, wow. You're finally right on a question. So
Hey, we'll see, man. What are you, a fortune teller? I think I did okay on number 1 and 2.
Let me kick a scenario to you.
Please.
Next season, Ivan Demidov's crushing it. Habs are doing well. Montembeault's found his form. Someone is in backup doing a half-decent job. And it's mid-January and the Habs have played, 45 games and they have 52 points. Are you trading a guy who's playing 22 minutes a night as a team is actually in the spot of potentially going for a real playoff spot? And also,
no.
I know he doesn't have too much playoff experience, but that discussion's going to come up eventually with this team. Yes, Caulfield and Suzuki have real legitimate playoff experience. Okay, beyond those two guys, it's light. It's going to be light.
You still have the vets in Gallagher, Anderson,
Of course, yes.
Savard, certainly, but yeah, it's a good point.
Savard and Matheson from a defensive standpoint, because the defenseman, yes, the forwards have a bit more. Galley, of course, has all those years. But the defenseman, it's Savard. I mean, even Savard doesn't have, he has the one mega run in 21 with the Lightning. Other than that, it's extremely light. And then Matheson has a sprinkling of games. I think something like 20 playoff games. I don't think you can trade a guy, even if by midway through next year, Matheson is just much more like your 3rd or 4th or even 5th guy. He's gone down the list. He's now playing 19, 20 minutes a game, which I don't think is going to happen that rapidly, but certainly with Savard, it would happen like that. And we know Savard's not under contract next year, but I think we've all kind of assumed he's going to have some type of short-term extension. I don't think you can trade him. I don't think if you're at, you are vying for a wild card spot that you can trade one of your, and I know he gets flack for it, but he is still a productive NHL defenseman. He is honestly entering the Patrice Brisebois territory in my mind with some fans, where they just hate him for no apparent reason. But then you're like, okay, he'll make some mistakes here and there, but he's decently productive. He eats a lot of minutes.
But that's the thing, Jordan. All you have to do to view Matheson in a positive light is just accept that once in a while he will make a little bit of a blunder. As soon as you accept that, and you call that what it is, there's way more positive than negative.
Yep.
But some fans refuse to see that. They do see it like the Brisebois thing. He just becomes sort of the scapegoat of, and that's a perfect comparable. An offensive defenseman who makes blunders defensively or on breakouts trying to, do something fancy. So yeah, I think you got to take the good with the bad, like with any player. Nobody seems to be pooping on Hudson for making similar, having similar issues, being this offensive guy who makes blunders either defensively or trying to do too much. So, spread the poop around as best you can, Habs fans. Yeah. Let's go here. Make it fair.
Let's move on to our next either or. So about Lane Hudson. Boy, he's making some nice passes out there these days. I absolutely loved. So there's obviously the overtime goal for Suzuki, where Caulfield, first of all, points to Hudson about, hey, go pass there. I think the lane had already figured out where he was going to pass through Cole, but thank you. But yeah, he is just doing really incredible stuff. He is now up to 13 assists in 23 games as of before the Boston recording. So our either or for this one, Brian, is again I might wipe this out entirely if he does the deed finally against the Bruins, but what is more likely? Unfortunately, this is a bad one. I'm sorry to turn the tables, but what is more likely, that Lane Hudson finishes goalless, or that Kirby Dach finishes the season with the worst plus minus in the NHL, which he currently has as of Sunday morning? He's a minus 18. He's worse in the league. What's more likely?
There's no good answer here. I think the Dach one is more likely. I cannot see a world in which Hudson doesn't score.
Yeah.
He's going to put one in the net. How many times has he tried? He's got 23 shots on goal. One of them is bound to go in eventually. If he just keeps shooting once a game, every game, one of them is bound to go in. The Canadians have not been great yet. I think they have the potential to be great, but they haven't been great yet at screening the goaltender and getting, as much traffic as possible in front of the net for point shots. They've been trained to do so with Matheson because he takes tons of point shots. So I don't know why they haven't been good yet this season, but maybe it's just something they haven't dove into deeply yet. As soon as that starts happening, Hudson's going to score. Oh, and by the way, he's also the guy with the most end-to-end rushes in the entire league. So he might not even need that. He might just go on another end-to-end rush, and rather than hitting the post, he'll put it into the back of the net. So I think neither one of these is particularly likely. Doc's going to figure it out. When he's playing with Line A, they're going to score more. That's going to improve his plus minus, and Hudson's not going to go the whole season without scoring. But I do have to go with Doc. I think that's more likely that he ends up with the worst plus minus in the league.
Okay, so let me provide some context here. His last 2 seasons in the NCAA with Boston University, Lane Hudson scored 15 goals in each of those seasons. So 30 goals across 2 seasons, 15 and 15. Do you know who also had 15 goals in their last season before turning pro? Who was a defenseman for the Montreal Canadiens who may have struggled to score early on in his career?
I know you want to say it. Go ahead.
Victor Mete had 15 goals in his last season in the
OHL.
Oh,
no. I was expecting like Subban. Oh, no.
It's a bad omen. Mete famously went, I think it was 127 games. Yeah, right, without scoring in the NHL. I was checking because I was like, okay, how much do you actually score in the NCAA? Okay, like 15 seasons, like that's once every 3 games. Like he was putting the puck in the net pretty consistently. And then I just went to compare him with Mete, unfortunately, and it just happened to be that Mete also had 15. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's suboptimal.
But Mete couldn't lift the puck more than a foot off the ground, and
yeah,
that's not true. It's not true, obviously. But Mete had a muffin. I think Hudson already has a stronger shot than Mete did in his prime. Prime, whenever that was. But oh man, yeah, that's a bad omen. But I don't think Mete ever went end to end the way Hudson does. He doesn't have the deception that Hudson does. Like Hudson could score a goal by just deking 5 skaters plus the goalie. So I don't like that comparison.
No. It's just I thought it was just a funny numerical
it's very
coincidence.
Funny. Yes.
Yeah, if I have to pick, look, it's the Doc one because the Canadians have had guys at the absolute bottom of the plus minus rankings for the last couple of years. Brendan Gallagher has been in the past a really big culprit of this, unfortunately. Not so much this year, but Doc being there, it's going to be hard. We'll see when Laine comes back. I think you're right. So I think the more likely one is Doc. Last either or before the episode ends. We'll go NHL wide again, but we'll stick to the Atlantic this time. I know we went out to the Central last time. So Brian, what is more likely? That the Toronto Maple Leafs do not win a playoff round, or that the Boston Bruins miss the playoffs? What is more likely?
So for this one, it would be so easy for me to just say that the Leafs have won a single playoff round in the last 20 years, and therefore they won't win one this year. So that's what I'm going to do. Leafs won't win a playoff series. Yes, the Bruins just may miss the playoffs, but I think that every year, and somehow they get in. So until the wheels truly, really start to come off, I'm not going to count them out. And yeah, the Leafs are not going to win a playoff round. I don't care who they're up against. They're choke artists. Congrats. You beat Tampa when they were struggling.
Yeah.
Yay. Way to go. Are you going to do it again? Don't think so.
Okay, so I will go the other way. It's more likely that the Bruins miss the playoffs. I know the East is a bit of a train wreck, but so are the Bruins. As predicted, the Capitals are a lot better than we thought they were.
As predicted by you, I said the opposite, so I'll take the lump on that one. I'll take the L. Great prediction.
Yeah, I also said the Sens would be in the mix, and I believe they're one singular spot above the Montreal Canadiens in the Eastern Conference right now. So
hilarious.
It's not all good stuff. This is potentially not the year, Brian. So there are spaces, there are open positions, basically. I do think Tampa gets their stuff together and solidifies that third Atlantic spot. So then it's wild card time, and who the heck knows? The Leafs have to win a playoff round. Beyond Florida, the Leafs are pretty good. You could argue the Leafs might actually even win the Atlantic over Florida, but we'll see. With how weak the Atlantic is, you're looking at, again, likely a Tampa Bay first round if you're finishing second, or someone very weak as a wild card team. You're going to have home ice. You're going to have all these forwards. There is no excuse at this point for them to not win it. They would be heavy, heavy favorites to win that first round playoff series. And despite everything we say, there's still quite a bit of playoff experience, really in the first round especially, on that team. So I don't see a universe where they don't win a first round playoff series this year. So I'm going to pick the Bruins missing the playoffs.
The Maple Leafs have been heavy favorites. Yeah, like you said, they'd be such heavy favorites. They've been heavy favorites every single time. And they haven't resolved the issues. The defense is a little better.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm stretching that. And the goaltending has been really good. Okay, let's see how they do in the playoffs.
Yep.
Coming up against Vasilevsky, who's done it before, who's actually gone the distance, who's shut really good teams out in playoffs. I just flat out don't see it. And also Tampa's going to pull some LTIR shenanigans and get a top 6 center, added in, and a defenseman and a bunch of stuff. So they're just going to pad their lineup at the end of the season the way they always do, the way Vegas always does. But Bruins missing the playoff. Is the best case scenario that both of these things happen as a Habs fan? I think definitely.
Well, that's not the
Bruins
game,
miss playoffs, and Leafs miss, don't make the second round. No, just a sidebar this, that would be glorious. We could be 32nd, I wouldn't care. We could be 32nd and lose both lotteries, and I wouldn't care.
I think the unfortunate nature with how the NHL playoffs are constructed is someone always comes out of the Atlantic, unless there's some weird wild card shenanigans. Someone we don't like is in a conference final every year. And that's really rough.
Yep.
Now the Panthers, I think we've said it before. I don't really care much about the Panthers. Good for them. They smacked us around a couple years ago, not so much last year. Whatever, they're good. They're well put together. Good for them. Any other team out of the Atlantic, I despise basically. That
Detroit, no. There's no way you can hate Detroit.
I meant any other good team
contender.
I despise.
Right. Right.
Plus the Sens. So yeah, Detroit, Buffalo, who cares? So yeah, it's just an awkward position to be in. So ideally, they both happen. I do think, the Leafs not winning a playoff round at this point is absolutely disastrous, and we will all hope to be there. So I think we can wrap up this episode of This Week in Habsland. We'll be back next week to keep talking Montreal Canadiens, maybe keep sprinkling in some NHL wide stuff. You can find us on social media at Blue Sky and TikTok at Habsland Pod. And if you like what you heard, feel free to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Until next Monday, go Habs.